Om Namah Shivaya Gurave Sachidananda Murtaye Nishprapanchaya Shantaya Niralumbaya Tejase. Hello everybody, it's Roberta Reeves, the Gangsta Guru, and I am here today to introduce a classmate of mine, and I'm very excited about this. Thomas Rowley is an author, and he has written a book that touched my heart. We're in the same publishing school together. I'm supposed to be writing a book, but I'm too busy doing this. Anyway, we are in the class together, and his book and his title of his book and the thesis of his book really touched my heart. I was an educator for 37 years, and so education is a subject near and dear, and Tom's books are about globally education, but specifically how you can help your child to develop thinking skills, which are not developed in the schools. Just saying. So, Thomas Rowley, welcome to the Gangsta Guru. You're on, Tom.
I'm glad to be here. Pleasure to chat with you.
Yes, we'll have fun. We'll have so much fun. So, Tom, can you first of all tell me just a little bit about, I see you have two books behind you. Can you tell me a little bit about, the titles are intriguing, and I love the covers. I love Scrabble.
This one, which is actually the book.
Okay.
The red one behind me is a teacher's guide.
Okay.
As you may remember, I'm a former professor, and I wrote a book to try to encourage parents and teachers, homeschool parents, private school parents, to encourage their students to ask questions about who wrote what they're reading, why they wrote it, what they intended the audience, and who was the intended audience, so that they'd have some idea of the expertise and the talent and whether or not they ought to believe what they read or hear. And in order to do that, to develop their critical thinking skills in a very non-threatening way, starting even in your earliest grades. You could do this in grade 2 or 3. Say, okay, kids, today we're going to read Roberta's book about little boys and girls playing with monkeys. And Roberta is an educator, and she did this, and she knows about little boys and monkeys. Okay, so I should believe you, or I should at least listen with an open mind. My hope, of course, is that as they progress through the education system and get up into, in the US, as you know, you can drop out of public education in the 8th grade. So my book encourages teachers to have a very concentrated effort in the 7th grade, so that the handful who do decide to say, you know, the hell with education, I don't need it, I don't need another couple of years of school. And I can empathize with that because I quit high school in the middle of my senior year.
Oh,
I've got 2 master's degrees and a PhD, and I'm a certified public accountant.
Yeah.
I just didn't like high school.
Yes, I used to talk to those kids, Tom. My job as a high school counselor was to convince those kids not to drop out. Please, where are you? I would call them. Please come to school. You're up on your number of days. Please, mother, get your kid out of bed. You know, all of those things. I used to love my immigrant kids. Why? They came and they valued the education that was given for free. Yeah.
Well, having lived outside the US for the last 20 years and having taught the last 10 in a US university that's based here with a flag operation, I've gotten to meet and deal with the children, sons and daughters of fairly well-to-do people, because the school's not cheap, and they're all graduates of bilingual private education here in Panama. And what surprised me was how little they knew about the history of their own country, never mind what they didn't know about the US or Europe or wherever else they thought they might want to go to work or to go to school. And so it's not a failing that I see in just in the US public education system, but a general failure in education worldwide to broaden the education of these kids.
Yeah, you know, Thomas, when you were talking about your mission of teaching kids critical thinking skills, do you know how revolutionary that is? They're going to draw and quarter you. They don't want people to think. They want people to fit in the little box. My kids who were autistic, my kids who were different, unique, or very, very, very smart did not fit. They'd end up in my office crying because they didn't fit in the system. But they felt like they were wrong, Tom. It was heartbreaking. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. I just had to.
Well, what drove me to writing the book in the first place was starting mostly around the pandemic 2 years ago now, I saw people, supposedly well-informed politicians, educators, physicians, making decisions that were developing criteria and restrictions and constraints and changing the way people lived, changing the way people died, constraints on the economy, on travel. And I'm going, well, you say you've got this model, but I'm an accountant by trade, so I'm trained to look at statistics and read numbers. And you're telling me that there's this great risk, but there's 14 million people that live in this community and 1,000 of them are sick. Where's the emergency?
Yeah.
Why weren't other people making those questions?
You're a problem because they're not taught. I started my first year of teaching in 1972. And then there was a place for creativity, there was a place for joy, there was a place for inquiry. You know, the inquiry method or the SSRI, remember that? Survey, question, read, recite, review, to the learning method. Oh my God, we would teach the kids to question. Now, all they freaking know is how to color in a little circle and how to regurgitate I watched the degradation happen in my 37 years. It started out a beautiful calling and it ended up, you know, as I said to you, it ended up with me from Easter until the end of school being a test administrator for course learning, for SATs, for you name it, any standardized test, but 6 freaking weeks of standardized tests, Tom. All they know is to how to fill in the circle. It breaks my heart because their little minds have been stunted.
Well, they've been cheated. The process, my original book title was called Blame It on Nom. And those men and women have grown into positions of authority. In the 60s, there were some organizations. I write 2 chapters outlining whose organization did what and what their manifesto was and what their goals were. And they've spent the last 25 or 30 years executing this process. And the problem at the university level is the self-selection methods that faculty use to hire new faculty. I remember when I finished my PhD, I was invited to 4 different universities to come in and teach what was then a starting kind of a course in accounting information systems, the computerization of accounting. And this was 87. And you'd go around and you'd meet with a half a dozen professors and you'd make a little presentation and some of them would take you to lunch and they decide whether or not you would fit in with their group. Well, as the older faculty aged and retired, the new faculty that's left are all of the progressives and it's the only ones that they hire anymore. So there's no 2 sides of the story being exposed to these people. STEM and the business schools, to the most part, according to some of the insiders who are still on university campuses, those are still relatively safe areas. But sociology and the humanities and English and history, they've been taken over. And the standardized education that you were having to give tests instead of giving counseling changed. They had, well, okay, we got to remove this teacher out of teaching civics and the history of the United States to passing a math test. And so they didn't learn it. They've made trade-offs. And those trade-offs have resulted in people who don't have the capacity to analyze information efficiently.
You know, I'm thinking of one story just quickly I can give you. I started out teaching physical science to 8th graders who were clearly not interested in physical science. They were only interested in their own anatomy, but we won't talk about that. I gave a bonus question. We lived 45 minutes from the nation's capital. So I gave the bonus question at the end of a test. I said, what is the capital of the United States? Do you know? They could not answer it. I get it. I totally get it. I thought it was a gift. No, I know.
There was a study done, I talk about it in the book, an organization that went around, asked several thousand people around the United States various questions that were drawn from the citizenship test that new immigrants who want to get an American passport and become an American citizen had to pass. Mm. The age group differences, people over 50, for the most part, passed the test. For people under 50, almost none of them passed the test.
Yes, Tom, I think we have dumbed down our educational system with all of this standardization. Even the food that it started out in 1972, where the food was wholesome food cooked by local ladies. They made the menu. It was organically of the community. Not great food, but good food, solid food, right? These ladies were lunch ladies. It ended up with cardboard pizza from the federal government because the schools had started to become on the federal teat. So they had to get the grants, so they had to get everything from the federal government. Then the federal government said, you will teach this, you will not teach this, you will. And pretty soon, the kids were not only nutritionally not sound, their poor little brains were slotted into one of those circles on the fill in the dots. And it's just tragic what happened to education.
It's a shame. And beyond that, all of the federal regulations that are imposed on universities, there's more people in the administrative end of a campus on a university occupying more office space than faculty that teach.
Well, where are your priorities? It's just a statement about priorities. You like bureaucracy, you don't like teachers. I'll tell you a story. I was adopted, I think I mentioned to you, by a Vietnamese family. My adoptive mother was Vietnamese. She fled Saigon in 1970, 71, like that, because she married an American, and her head would be chopped off if she stayed. So they, skedaddled out of there. Those kids came here and totally availed themselves. My mother's son stayed behind. He had 4 children, and he was put in a re-education camp. And I said, why is he put in a re-education camp? He's just a teacher. And do you know what she said? They're the most dangerous. They are the most dangerous. Why? They teach people to think. I never got it until then, that teachers are dangerous people when they're doing their job right.
Yeah. If you want to have a dominant political control,
yeah,
burn the books, shoot the lawyers, and silence the teachers.
Yeah, well, they did that when the communists took over in Vietnam. I can tell you that's for sure. And the other story I have about what happened there, very interesting. My son went there, and he's sitting at a little cafe, and he looks across the street, and there's a guy driving a rickshaw. And his friend looked at him and said, see that guy over there? He was a professor at the university. He can't be a professor anymore. They broke his glasses. They forbid his children to be educated. Not generations generations. They forbid, they break your glasses. So then, I mean, where would we be if they broke our glasses? We can't see, right? You know? But yeah, it's tragic, and we better wake up. Is all I can say. We better wake up. So I want to cover some of your questions. Let me paraphrase. You wrote this book to empower students and their teachers and their parents to become critical thinkers. Is that a fair synopsis of what your intention for this book is?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, I want the students to become critical thinkers, but the book is aimed at the adults, the parents, the teachers, the counselors, to demonstrate critical thinking as a normal way of living, and to not only improve the critical thinking skills that have been excluded from young people's education,
Right.
but to incorporate the rights and responsibilities of citizenship so that people understand. One of the questions on the citizenship test is, how many branches of government are there? Well, you can see these sidewalk interviews in front of Yale and Harvard and Princeton, and the kids are out on the street getting a soda or a sandwich, and they ask them, well, how many amendments are to the Constitution? What does the First Amendment provide? And they look at them like, huh? What are you talking about? What three branches of the government?
What's an amendment?
They have no idea.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And you've done this to them. This is not their fault. That's what's tragic to me. These kids.
No, it's not the kids' fault.
No, it isn't.
It's the educator's fault.
And the parents, in my experience, largely abdicated their responsibilities to the school. They didn't teach a lot of values. They certainly did not teach a lot of thinking. They dumped them at school, and school was the babysitter, and whatever happened, happened. Until it didn't happen, and they were pissed, and they came to my office. I had an acronym of, a pop came through the door. A pop came through the door, a pissed off parent. They would always come to the guidance office. Yeah, I would get to deal with them. But I had hanging in my office for, 20 years, 25 years, a quote from Aristotle, and it said this: anyone who has meditated on the art of governing understands that it is in the education of the youth that the fate of the nation rests. Yeah, Aristotle.
And it wasn't until the pandemic that parents became painfully aware that the assumptions they had about the quality of the teachers and the education became obvious to them that, wait a minute, I'm looking at what this kid is reading and what they're talking about. Where'd this crap come from?
Federal government, frankly. That's what I think.
Yeah.
Program.
It's a shame. And one of the goals, probably the principal objective of my book, was to get parents to become advocates and to challenge the school boards and say, hey, wait a minute. What you're teaching our children isn't what we think you should be teaching our children.
Yeah,
and these are the things that we want.
Yeah.
Add this course. Teach our children about history. Teach our children about how to think, not what to think.
Yes. My friend.
Let's see how it goes.
Yeah, my friend Jules Muller homeschooled her kids, but she was a nomadic homeschooler. She put her kids in a big Airstream, and she took them to the historic places, and they talked about what the hell happened here. What the hell happened at Appomattox? What was that about? And they walked in the footsteps of what was going on. It's just an amazing difference in education.
One of the reasons why I live in the tropics is that I grew up outside of Boston.
Oh.
I went through second grade to sophomore year of high school in the suburbs outside of Boston. I hate cold weather.
I know.
I remember dramatically standing waiting for a school bus, and it's 20 degrees below zero, and the bus didn't show up because the kids that lived in town were smart enough. They drained the antifreeze out of the buses, and if the remote kids couldn't get to school, nobody had to go.
Don't you
So-
love kids? They're so ingenious.
Oh, ingenious is exactly right. So, but in Boston, not only do you get that Puritan work ethic shoved down your throat,
Mm.
you were around Concord and Lexington and all of the places where the core of the revolution occurred.
Mhm.
It was nothing. It was a 2-hour drive to some of these towns to stand there and look. My mother had a friend who she played bridge with, who was married to the grandson of a great, by that time, probably great grandson of Paul Revere.
Wow. Hey, I think Paul Revere was a conspiracy theorist. What do you think?
The British are coming. The British are coming.
Conspiring against the king. Oh dear.
Exactly.
Oh God.
Yeah.
So you wrote the book to empower parents, anyone who works with kids, parents, educators, to kind of remedy this malady that has hit education. Oh
Fill
God.
up the gaps that they're not getting at school.
Yes, you are so needed. You are so needed. I'm not kidding. What can I tell you? You are so needed. You know, one phrase that you wrote to me early on in our conversation was, how did education become indoctrination? And that was an epiphany for me, Tom. That was like, that explained my whole 37 years but it put me up at a level of looking at it in its integrity instead of schlossing off to the library to give the test. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I gave me a perspective, like, yes, that is exactly what happened. It became an indoctrination process instead of, can you regurgitate back what we have told you? We don't want you thinking for yourself. Do not color outside of the circle. Your test will not be scored.
No.
You dumb shit.
Yep. If you're not smart enough to get all those pencil marks inside that little circle, we don't want you.
Exactly. And it does things to the kids' psyches. Questioning is verboten. You're a smartass if you ask questions. I mean, it's just like a whole... When my first year of teaching, I was teaching next to this guy who loved opera. He was a science teacher, Ernie Morton. I will never forget him. Took me to my first opera. Anyway, Ernie would play in science class Nibelungenlied. the Ring trilogy. Okay, the opera. And you hear this sound coming out. And I thought it was bad, but I don't know if it was bad or not. He was like giving them another perspective of life, another, I don't know. So what can the readers gain from reading your book, Tom? What do you think they'll get out of your book?
Well, what I'm hoping that they'll draw from it is an awareness of the fact that they probably did not get some talking head on TV's word that this is what's happening without saying, well, what's this person's reputation? How frequently are they correct? And should we really buy what they say, or is there some other alternative that we should look at? And to bring that into their own home and start with their own kids, and to encourage people to become advocates for those two skill sets, critical thinking, and to incorporate more of civics, what we used to call civics when I was in school.
Problems of democracy.
History.
POD, problems of democracy.
Civil responsibility,
Yeah.
And at the end of the book, I put through, after I go through evidence of why it happened and how it happened and what the consequences were, I've got an action plan in there, about 4 or 5 pages, says, look, if you want to become an advocate, here's the 6 or 7 things you need to do.
Oh, perfect.
Learn this, study this,
Wow.
learn about what the rules are for your state, or what your county, what your city is, because there's state law in every jurisdiction that says you are supposed to teach X, Y, and Z, and you're not supposed to teach Q, Z, and T. And a lot of the schools are doing Z, T, and T.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're getting away with it because nobody knows, well, those are the,
And
so run for the school board, challenge them.
Yeah, on behalf of the parents, they are beleaguered. They've got these kids, they're both working. Again, how much time? I mean, I feel bad for them because having a kid is a terrific responsibility. You're forming a psyche, a human who's going to function in society. And, you know, I can't say that I went to every PTA meeting. I was pretty sick of school by the time the day ended. 37 years of school, you know, I get it.
Well, I talk about the generational change from the baby boomer generation to the Gen X, the millennials, and the young kids that are sometimes Generation Z, sometimes called homelanders, that the baby boomers got educated by the people who survived the Depression and World War II.
My dad and my
They understood what you needed to know. And the boomers just assumed that the next round of teachers were teaching their kids what they were taught.
Yeah.
And they're not.
And it creeped in. It just crept in like a malignancy. It's really tragic.
You and I have lived in Latin America for a while, and we know that some of the issues in this part of the world are a result of a culture that isn't really good at teaching self-respect.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you don't respect yourself, you're not going to have much respect for anybody else.
And he taught us as little babies, respect. That's all you have to do is respect. Respect your education. Respect your teachers. Oh, that was another thing. Oh my God. Everybody knows how to be a teacher. You know that. Why? Because they went to school. And they can tell you how to frickin' do your job. They have never stood in front of 30 8th grade boys trying to teach them physical science when they're like throwing airplanes and taking scalpels and don't even talk to me. Yeah, so everybody knows how people should be educated. And so what's coming to me, Tom, is an interview that I had with a parent my last year. And by my last year, I freaking did not care. I was saying whatever I thought, which was dangerous, right? So it was not a good scene. So I'm talking to this mom, and of course there are 7 teachers there, and she's defending her kid, and every teacher says the same thing, not doing the work. And finally she turns to me and she said, "Are you saying my child is stupid?" And I said, "No, ma'am, I am saying your child is lazy." I didn't care. It was politically incorrect, but I was not saying the kid was stupid. I was saying he didn't do his work.
Just didn't do the work.
It's easy. It's not hard to connect those dots, is it? So we have to wind up, but I want to talk to you, I want you to give me a summary of what you want to give, how you want to change humanity by writing this book. That's what the mandate from Chandler Bolt.
Well, what I hope to do with the information in the book and develop, and I have the courses, I taught critical thinking and decision making for decades. I've been a problem solver since I was probably 18. First job I had as an adult was teaching pilots and crew members how to jump out of an airplane and survive once they landed on the ground. So I've been standing in front of, that's solving a problem, right?
Yeah.
As a CPA, I'm helping people solve tax problems and foreign investment problems. So I look at this as how to solve the problem of we're getting terrible decisions from our politicians.
Yes.
So I want to create courses, workshops online and live to empower adults to reform what's being taught in school.
Yeah.
It's less about objecting to a particular course that they don't want taught, and it's more about saying, okay, teach my children to be critical thinkers, and you can feed them all of the information that you want about theory X, If they understand critical thinking, they will challenge the sources of the information and they will say, your facts don't match the circumstances. Thank you very much. I've heard your argument, but I don't buy it.
You know, and you applaud them for that because their thinking process, you affirm that. You affirm that behavior instead of smacking them and putting them in the back of the class. Anyway, this week I'm going to end up with a song. You know, Sidney Poitier passed this past week. And it recalled to my mind that great movie, To Sir with Love. Do you remember it? He was a teacher and Lulu sang the song. And the song made me well up and cry. I don't know how influential that song was in my deciding to become a teacher. And both, not one, both of my children. My son is an ESOL teacher in Brooklyn to the West Side Story kids, you know? And my daughter teaches English at a very prim and proper school in Maryland. And both of my kids, after many master's degrees, decided they would be teachers. But the importance of what you're doing, I want to underscore it and I want to applaud you because you are, I said this to you, you are sorely needed. From the front lines, I was triage. I was in the guidance office, you know what I mean? But I can see the value of teaching people to think critically, loving the children by helping them develop their mind, not stunting their minds into little circles. So, okay, Thomas Rowley, we are going to put links in under this video, and we are going to put images of your book, because you said you sent me the images and your author shots, okay, on the video. I think we can have many more conversations, Thomas. We're the same generation, and we have the same sort of like, what the hell happened? What happened?
How did this happen?
Exactly.
You know? Exactly.
All right, sweetie. Namaste. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. Thank you, Tom.